Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and welcome to my channel. Before I start, hang on, I'm just going to quickly show you the dog. There we go. Hello. This dog who is peacefully napping. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit, carrying on with the Booker Longlist of my second to last book from the long list, Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. And it was only after, kind of a little bit after the long list was announced, I'd been talking about her as if she was like a brand new author to me or whatever, and suddenly realised I'd read something else by her a couple of years ago that I actually really enjoyed, The Weekend, even though there were mixed feelings in a book club that I was part of where we read it. But anyway, Stoneyard Devotional. I will talk a little bit about some of the spoilers in this book later on. I'll try and keep it as spoiler-free as possible, but there will be sort of an announcement of that moment before it comes, so please do hop out if you need to. But let's get started talking about this book. So, Stoneyard Devotional is an incredibly spare and quiet book in many ways, but I found it really engaging. It's told in these very sort of almost small, I don't know, literally none of the pages I've shown have then given it, but the kind of these small vignettes. Often there are mini chapters that are sort of 2-3 pages, sometimes shorter, sometimes only a little bit longer. And it's done in a kind of way that I think really, where form and function really map onto each other perfectly. So the whole idea of this is there is a young woman who, for many reasons, particularly around her family and kind of her sort of strained and odd relationship with her family, and particularly a sort of the complexities she has about the ideas of losing them, goes to join, it's not quite a convent, it's sort of a kind of spiritual place, but the idea is that to some degree she's just there experiencing this sort of joy of being part of sort of giving back and doing service and being part of religious contemplation or spiritual contemplation and all these other things. And in some ways it feels like she is acting out of a sort of sense of penance. She is to some degree trying to atone for something in her life, but she's not exactly sure what that is at the beginning. She sort of goes just out of a sense of feeling like she needs it. Her life has been so chaotic that she feels the need to sort of press reset and do something else completely out of the blue. It almost feels like a sort of midlife crisis as well. And this is sort of mirrored later when we find out how sort of spontaneous this decision is. I say later, it's still fairly early in the book, so it's not a spoiler. But we find out that she's not even told many of her friends and family that she's going. And so many of them have become incredibly upset with her because they feel as if she's just, you know, she's unnecessarily worried them, or she's just been really irresponsible and all these other things. And there's something really captivating about the way that's done, because the main character, the narrator, doesn't really feel that. She sort of understands how people might feel that way, but she also knows that she doesn't really have any choice, in her mind at least. She is in such crisis, or in such a sort of feeling of needing to do this, that she doesn't see that. She must do this thing. And in doing so, she kind of starts to unravel so many other parts of her life. And again, I'll have to go into spoilers to talk about some of this, but there's some I can talk about pre-spoilers. The kind of idea of what kind of unspools from this, I think, is really fascinating. This idea of just kind of guilt and penance and atonement that she feels throughout her life. And the various ways that as soon as she's presented with stillness and with quiet and with a kind of an environment that is somewhat caring, but also kind of in some ways leaves no, you know, doesn't really suffer fools gladly, she starts to unravel all of these things from her past. And I think this is one of the absolute strengths of this book, is just this kind of almost spooling confession from her. We, as the reader, don't know this woman. She is essentially talking to us like we are a kind of confession booth. And in doing so, she starts to unravel these bits of her past and what these mean. And a lot of them, to some degree, are relatively trivial. She'll talk about moments that are important for other people, but where her own contribution perhaps to the moment wasn't as pronounced as she's maybe thinking, but she is racked with this guilt of feeling like she has to unburden herself of it. And we are the confessor, we're the person that she's confessing to. And in some ways that makes it an uncomfortable read, because we are to some degree allowed far more insight into her life than we almost should, right? This is not someone we know, and we are hearing these unburdened secrets from her just spooling out in this really big way. And it kind of starts to show us that there's something else perhaps going on. And I found this really interesting as someone, not only as someone fairly anxious who always thinks he's done something wrong, but also just the way, there's something so beautifully human about the way that she is just naked almost in front of us. She's this vulnerable creature just telling us everything and kind of feeling guilty and bad. And I think that's what I found really special about it. It is religious almost in that sense of this being a confession, and we are an oddly complicit audience who sort of to some degree have to decide if she's right or wrong, or if she's absolved. All the while we are not the people who she needs to be apologizing to, or confessing to. So it's this really odd book in that respect. And I loved it. I thought the sort of spareness of the tone and language was so good. I thought it did so much, because although these appear like little vignettes that feel inconsequential, there's something lingering there that's unnerving, and we are basically being presented with someone who feels broken, and we are being asked to fix her or help her heal. And we as the reader can't step in and do anything. Instead, we have to watch the events of the book play out. I'm going to jump into some spoilers here, but please, if you, feel free to hop off if you need to. But let's get talking about some of the spoilers. If you do need to pop off, thank you for stopping by, and let's go into them. So getting into some spoilers, this particularly follows a character called Helen Parry, and we learn at one point, one of the kind of unburdenings that we get from the main character is around a young girl who was bullied at school. And she was somebody who lost her, had sort of a difficult relationship with her parents, and, there were sort of abandonment issues and substance issues and all these other things happening around her. And so this young girl is in school, Helen Parry is in school, just completely unprepared, unready to be there, and also to deal with being a teenager in a school that can be a particularly hostile environment. And one thing we start to learn is that, this girl doesn't really understand social cues, so she will go up to people and say things, but she'll go up to the mean girls and she'll say these things and she'll get routinely mocked and all of these things. And there's this one big event that this leads up to in school where she has a particularly heinous bit of bullying. And this character starts to feel this, our kind of narrator starts to kind of reminisce on this, and lo and behold, Helen Parry features, Parry features in the book as a character who we then interact with. And our narrator is so keen on telling her, look, I'm so sorry for what I did before in the past. I really shouldn't have done it. Helen Parry says, well, I don't even remember it, really. Oh, that thing happened. She's gone on to be this successful person in many other ways. And so to some degree doesn't want to let this moment define her. But this moment defines our narrator far more than it has done the victim of those sort of attacks and that bullying. And so we start to kind of also wonder what's happening here. This kind of idea of actually someone can shrug it off and move along, but you've maybe held on to the guilt of that for all of your life. What does that mean? What does sort of atonement or absolution look like in a situation like that? Can you accept it for somebody else? Can you be the person to take on that burden and then unburden yourself somewhere else? Does it work like that? And I think this book does something really clever in that. Of Helen, to some degree, very much understands that, but we also know that there's a potential power dynamic where Helen could, if she wanted to, wield this as a weapon. At one point, if I remember correctly, there's another character who appears, who we're also told that this man might have also been at the school at some point. And our narrator again sort of tries to say like, oh, hey, do you remember this moment? And this person doesn't. So this is still a big thing for the narrator, but not for anybody else. And so we start to think, well, how much of her life is then shaped by guilt and remorse and so many other things? And how useful is that emotion? What is she able to do with that? Because this hasn't really changed anyone's lives. It's just something she's holding on to. And in many ways that mirrors some of the relationships she has with her own parents, where there are many things that she's trying to process and work through. And is it her job to forgive them? Is it her job to do some of those things? Or is she just going to grieve and pin things on them? Or if she does that do anything? And again, this book just gets caught up in these really interesting discussions, I think, about the nature of forgiveness and atonement and absolution and all these other things. And again, obviously, all of these things have a religious overtone. There are, people in this book who are sort of in religious roles. They're kind of sisters or nuns or whatever, or kind of at least sort of proxies for that. And to some degree, the guilt hasn't left, but she is feeling almost the kind of the religious weight of that on her. And I think this book does so many clever things with that I just found really, really interesting. And all of that in a relatively short and quite spare book. It's a book that we don't linger particularly long on details. There'll be these little mice in the area that she's trying to, kind of make sure kind of go away in this place that she's staying in. And in some ways, these mice are also this kind of indicative of this sort of subtle gnawing background noise. There's something that she can't quite fully eradicate. She can, set a trap and get rid of a few mice. She can tidy the kitchen and try and make sure that as few mice are drawn to it as possible, but they're always going to be there. And in some ways, that's her guilt as well. There is never fully going away. It's not addressed fully. It's only ever been sort of tidied away and pushed to one side. And I found it really, I just thought this was really, really well done. I get why people have not enjoyed this book. I love slightly floaty books in one person's perspective inside their head. This is my dream. But I can see why this wouldn't necessarily work for other people. It's almost too quiet, I think, for some people. Whereas I think for me, the kind of the little intricacies of this book I thought were so well crafted, and I really loved this. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker talking about this book. I hope you've enjoyed this book. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.